As a young boy, a very young boy, mind you, growing up in the 60s, Alice's Restaurant held a very special place in my heart. It was clever and ironic and captured the spirit of those days. You may remember the red VW microbus, the shovels, rakes, and implements of destruction, and the 27 8x10 color glossy pictures with the circles and arrows and a paragraph on the back of each one explaining what each one was to be used as evidence against us. You may remember the people on the bench marked Group W. So if you remember the song, you know that at the end, Arlo Guthrie says that if someone would show up at the draft board, walk into the psychiatric exam and say, "Shrink, you can get anything you want at Alice's Restaurant," and walk out, you know, if one person, just one person does it, they may think he's really sick and they won't take him. And if 3 people do it, 3, can you imagine? 3 people walking in, singing a bar of Alice's Restaurant, and walking out, they may think it's an organization. And can you imagine 50 people walking in, singing a bar of Alice's Restaurant, and walking out, and friends, they may think it's a movement. And that's what it is. We'll get back to Alice shortly. There's nothing I can say about the challenges facing us that you don't already know. Family foundations have lost about 30% of their assets, and smaller foundations are expected to curb grants by 60%, according to surveys. There are optimists and pessimists among us in this room, but I've met few funders who believe that 2010 will be a better year for not-for-profits than 2009 will be. The question is, what are we prepared to do about it? Whether you voted for him or not, President Obama captured the imagination of much of this country by convincing Americans that while we are living in a troubled time, it's also a time of historic opportunity. One we'll not likely see again in our lifetimes, to effect change, to take on the tough issues, to reshape the way our society works. Every smart investor knows that troubled times are pregnant with opportunities. Nowhere is that truer than the not-for-profit world. As Jewish funders, what are we going to do with the opportunity that has been thrust upon us? Our children and grandchildren will judge us based on how we respond to this challenge. It's a whole new ballgame out there. Of that we can be sure. Peter Drucker once said that the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic. We need a new logic model that will guide our actions. We are focused on our own foundations, our endowments, the not-for-profits we're committed to, and we should be. But we must also focus on the big picture. What kind of Jewish community do we want to emerge out of this crisis? Professor Jonathan Sarna spoke to our staff a few weeks ago, and he asked, how are we going to plan for a community whose resources have been reduced by 30%? It's the right question, and it's the wrong question. We need to answer it. We can't pursue a strategy of just firing those staff that are easiest to dismiss. It's unethical, and it's unwise. Instead, we need to make strategic and painful decisions about what services and agencies our community no longer needs and can no longer afford. We've just finished a 20-year period of easy money. There was more than enough to go around. And if you had a good personality and a wide enough network, you could often count on support. Those days are over. I'm not sure they're ever coming back. If they are, it'll be a long while till we see them again. In an age of scarcer resources, we need to decide what our priorities are as a community and get behind them, whether they are our personal cause or not. One of the wonderful things about what my friend Larry Moses calls private Jewish philanthropy is its independence and autonomy. Creativity is fostered and celebrated. I'm afraid that the time has come when that independence must be tempered with collective responsibility, when that autonomy must negotiate with a commitment to collaboration. So with apologies to Professor Sarna, the question is not how can we plan for a community that is 30% fewer resources, but how can we envision a community that is 70% more effective, more mission-driven. That's a more inspiring vision than to have Jewish historians label this the era of Jewish communal downsizing. I'm less interested in whether our past behavior was right or proper. Churchill warned us many years ago, of this I am quite sure, that if we open a quarrel between the past and present, we shall find we have lost the future. Do we have the courage to embrace a different future? I'd like to propose one possible vision of that future for your consideration. That future would have three foci. The first, a commitment to universal Jewish literacy. There are too many Jews today that don't know the beauty and magic of their heritage, that don't know the rhythms of Jewish life and the Jewish calendar, that don't know the mysteries of Torah and Midrash, that have never wrestled with Hillel or Maimonides or Yehuda Amichai. While we need not all be scholars, we can't expect to raise a generation of committed Jews when that generation does not understand the Judaism that they're committed to. So we should each agree to put 1/3 of our funding to support those not-for-profits that have exhibited a commitment to fostering Jewish literacy with a special emphasis on those ideas that have the capacity to be taken to scale. Now, that doesn't mean the particular not-for-profit you support has to take the idea to scale. But if our aim is universal Jewish literacy, we need models that are replicable or that can realistically accommodate large numbers. It doesn't matter to me whether your preferred laboratory is a day school classroom, a bunk at camp, or a bus on a birthright trip. Jewish values can be taught in congregational schools, in alternative minyanim, or in teen philanthropy programs. You can target children, teens, or adults. You can direct your efforts in Toronto, Toledo, or Tel Aviv. But we need to agree that ignorance of Jewish text and tradition is not an option we can live with and has no place in a Jewish future that we're trying to reimagine. Number two, a commitment to Jewish peoplehood. If Judaism is a set of ideas, it's also ultimately a family, a nation, a people. We need to feel and act upon a special responsibility to other Jews around the world. We need to reinforce that sense of peoplehood in our younger generation and give them opportunities to meet and develop relationships with other Jews. And we need to ensure the safety and well-being of Jews everywhere simply because they are Jews. That may include fighting a rising tide of anti-Semitism in Europe. It may be investing in the third sector in Israel. And it might mean addressing anti-Israel bias on campuses here in the United States and Canada. Each Jew needs to feel they have a place in the Jewish world. And that place comes with rights as well as responsibilities. 1/3 of our funding needs to address these issues. And third, a dedication to service. While it would be unfair and inaccurate to describe the first two as a means to an end, it would also miss the point to build a community dedicated only to our own perpetuity. The prophets of old did not develop grand visions of Jewish continuity, nor should we be satisfied with such uninspiring fare. The prophets dreamed of people dedicated to creating a world that was a little better than the one they were living in. Societies that were a little kinder to widows and orphans and the weakest among us. The mission of the Jew was to imagine what the world could look like if she were determined to leave her neighborhood a little bit better than how she found it. The mission of the Jewish people was to imagine what our communities could look like if a whole people were determined to make them just a little better, and how improved the world could be if we could serve as an example of that dedication. What are we doing to address issues of inequality, poverty, racism, sexism, slavery, and hunger? For Jews young and old to dedicate themselves to this would be ennobling. The messianic notion in Judaism was meant to give hope that the world could move in a certain direction, that tomorrow could be better than today, that we were not doomed to be powerless in a history that proceeded without paying us heed. But waiting for a messianic age can also have its peril and can lead us to abdicate our responsibilities. Let's invite our youth to dedicate themselves to making their neighborhoods, their communities, their world just a little better. Let's dedicate ourselves as well. Let's put 1/3 of our funding to this aim. So how do we get there? I think we need to change the way we work in 3 ways.